Hey guys, what's up? I'm Erin and welcome back to the channel. If you're interested in personal finance and you like to stay up to date on the latest news, chances are some recent headlines have caught your eye. President Biden's proposal for the budget for 2025, which has since been backed by current Vice President Kamala Harris, who also happens to be a presidential candidate for the upcoming election, has been making some headlines with some of the line items, and specifically, there is a new tax being proposed on unrealized capital gains. The proposal is for a minimum of a 25% tax on unrealized capital gains that would affect individuals or households with a net wealth of over $100 million. As a quick refresher, when it comes to capital gains, currently they are only leveled once physical or financial assets are sold. Think stocks, which would include index funds, ETFs, mutual funds, bonds, things like that, or maybe real estate, or even physical assets like collectibles, antiques, jewelry. There's also a distinction to be made in capital gains tax rates. There is short-term capital gains taxes, which align with traditional income taxes, and long-term capital gains rates, which are generally more favorable and apply to assets that you've held for over a year. Now, the proposal to introduce a tax on unrealized capital gains is one we haven't seen before. It's one that would have you paying a tax on something simply because it appreciated in value and simply because you still own it. An important distinction to be made is that this tax really is aimed at the uber wealthy, as we're looking at individuals who have a net worth in excess of $100 million, so not the everyday American. The proposal is intended to address wealth inequality, ensuring that the richest Americans contribute more in taxes, particularly since much of their wealth growth comes from assets that appreciate in value over time. And looking at the details of this proposal, this tax would affect slightly less than about 10,000 Americans. And the Biden administration estimates that the unrealized capital gains tax would generate about $503 billion in tax revenue from the government's 2025 to 2034 fiscal years. So let's say we have an uber wealthy individual who has $100 million invested in the stock market. Let's say the stock market returns 10% that year, so their portfolio's value has increased by $10 million. Well, if this tax were to be introduced, they would owe $2.5 million in taxes simply because their portfolio appreciated. Keep in mind that this investment isn't being sold. You're simply being taxed because it appreciated in value. Now, there is no discussion to the counterpoint, like what would happen if assets depreciated in value. So we don't really have an answer to that side of the question. And keep in mind that down the road, if you go and sell some of these assets, you would owe capital gains taxes on them. Now, if I know my audience, and I feel like I do, I think we can all see a few warning flags here. Like, why would we start to introduce a tax on assets we haven't done anything with yet? Assets that have simply appreciated in value. Like I said, this is unprecedented. It's something that hasn't been done before. Yes, I do realize that this is a tax that is targeting a very select group of Americans, but I do think that it should cause concern for investors as a whole. Now, before we go any further, I think it's worth noting that I don't think this is a proposal that's going to get passed. I don't think it's going to make any headway trying to go through the Senate or the House. But since it is currently making headlines, I think it's worthy as a talking point. But realistically, I don't think it's going to get passed, and I don't think it's going to go anywhere. The thing for me that comes to mind with economic proposals is not their immediate direct impact, but rather their potential unintended consequences. Because when we make proposals that affect the economy as a whole, there are always unintended consequences. So my biggest concern with the proposal to enact a tax on unrealized capital gains is that down the road, this tax would expand to affect more than the original target audience, more than those current roughly 10,000 Americans or so. I think down the road that this would actually impact all investors as a revenue source for the government, and here's why. When income taxes were first levied in 1913 following the passage of the 16th Amendment, initially income taxes were designed to only tax wealthier income earners. Rates started at 1% and didn't start until a threshold of $3,000 of earned income for an individual earner, $4,000 for a married couple filing jointly, and worked their way up to a 7% income tax on an income of $500,000 a year. Now, being that those were numbers for 1913, if we put them in today's dollars, that would be an income of $83,000 for an individual, $106,000 for married couples, and $14 million a year for that highest income tax rate. The current median wage of an individual worker in the United States is about $59,000 a year. As we can see, looking at the current federal tax tables, income tax brackets have expanded to include nearly all income earners. Capital gains tax itself was introduced in 1913, and at the time, they followed the same rules as income tax. There was really no distinction to be made from income earned from investments and income earned through working wages. They were just all lumped together and taxed accordingly. But remember, income tax didn't start until that threshold of $3,000 annual income for individuals and $4,000 for married couples filing jointly. In 1921, capital gains started to receive favorable tax treatment and were subject to lower tax rates if held for more than 2 years. This was done in a way to encourage investment and promote economic growth. Over time, the tax rates have changed and the holding periods necessary to meet this threshold of long-term capital gains tax has changed, but the basic principle has remained the same, the principle of favorable tax treatment as a way to encourage investment. And I feel like this proposal to begin taxing unrealized capital gains does the exact opposite. It actively discourages investment. When the Social Security tax was first introduced in 1935, it applied to only the first $3,000 of income. And again, that's $1935. So if we were to look at that in terms of 2024 dollars, that would be nearly $70,000. As of 2024, the max income subject to Social Security tax is up to $168,600. So again, we see that this tax has expanded beyond the original scope of its original intent. I did actually do a video on the income of $168,600 that entitles you to the maximum Social Security benefits. So if you're interested in a deeper dive on that one, I will link it down below for you to check out. And please note that even though I'm saying that this tax has expanded beyond its original scope, I'm not bashing the Social Security program. Yes, it's in need of reform to remain solvent over time, but it's an absolutely necessary program that many retirees rely on. Or we could talk about excise taxes, which were initially imposed on luxury goods or behaviors associated with wealth. These were also referred to as sin taxes, not to be confused with sin tax, but they were imposed on things like alcohol and tobacco and gambling, items that weren't really essentials and items that were often seen as the luxury splurges of the wealthy. And just as a side note, I grew up watching I Love Lucy on Nick at Night, and I truly did love Lucy. And I remember that smoking was absolutely glorified in that show, but it was a different era. And one of the saddest days of my childhood was when my mom told me that Lucy and Ricky, or Desi Arnaz, had actually gotten divorced in real life, and I still don't think I'm over it. But back to the topic at hand, which is taxes, rather than my internal childhood sadness, over time, these excise taxes have expanded to include more items. Now they are levied on gas, utilities, telephone services, as well as airline tickets. Again, they've expanded to products and services beyond the original target, and now apply to a broader set of items that are used by the vast majority or nearly all Americans. Taxes are absolutely necessary. We live in a society and we have a government, and that government needs to generate a revenue in order to provide programs and services. Taxes on income are essential as a revenue source for our government. Taxes for Social Security and funding that program is essential for our society, and so forth. But I use these examples to illustrate that it's very easy that once a tax is introduced, for that tax to expand beyond its original intent. And that's what I think is most dangerous about this proposal, to start introducing a tax on unrealized capital gains. I think it's only a matter of time, if this were ever passed, that this tax would expand beyond its original scope. Initially, yes, this tax may only target the uber wealthy, but I think over time it would expand, and soon it would target those who are considered simply wealthy, and then those who are considered middle class. And over time, I think it would expand to affect all investors. A tax like this actively discourages long-term investment. It discourages you from holding on to your investments. So I think a tax like this is a disservice to all investors. What are your thoughts? Leave them in a comment down below. I post new videos every single week. If you got anything at all out of this one, please give it a like. If you're new here, please consider subscribing, or if you know of someone who might get something out of this type of content, please consider sharing. I'll see you soon. Bye. Date on foo. Not even sure that's a word, unless you're talking about the Foo Fighters. This is our you've seen some... Nothing. You've seen nothing. I can't do this. Okay, my baby is sleeping. We have 40 minutes to get this done. Okay, down the road. $168,600. Don't mess up that number. So my biggest concern, okay, ow, stupid chair. At least it's off camera. Income that entires items like tax assist older people is necessary. I didn't like that at all. I think this is a very, I don't even know what I think anymore. Absolutely that.